Hi, and welcome to the News Building in London Bridge. We are running slightly behind because we've had such a passionate debate this morning. So apologies for us being a bit behind. I'm Rachel Taylor. I'm PwC UK's Government and Health Industries leader. And over the past few hours, the second Times Education Summit has been taking place. And for the next 30 minutes, I'm going to try to bring to life some of the passion and energy that we heard from the guests throughout the morning about this really important topic. I just wanted to quickly get guests to introduce themselves. So Priya, do you want to start by introducing yourself?
Well, thanks so much, Rachel, and thanks for having me. I'm Priya Lakhani. I'm the founder and chief executive of Century Tech. I also sit on the UK government's AI Council and founded the Institute for Ethical AI in Education. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Great to have you. Brett?
Hi, sorry, I just need to unmute. My name is Brett Wigdortz. I founded the charity Teach First about 20 years ago and run it for 15 years. And the last few years I've been focused on early years, building an edtech operating system for childminders, and now the largest childminding agency in the country called Tiney.
Great, thank you, Brett. And Oli?
Hi everyone, my name is Oli de Botton. I'm not into edtech. I feel like a complete Luddite here, so apologies in advance. I'm the chief executive of the Careers and Enterprise Company, and our job is to try and support schools, colleges and employers to deliver modern careers education. Prior to that, I was a head teacher and I co-founded the charity Voice 21, which seeks to put speaking at the heart of the curriculum for young people.
Great, thank you. And you see we've got some amazing panel this afternoon. So this is the second year the Education Summit's been held, and I'm very proud that PwC has sponsored it again. So this year's theme, which was about the need for education reform, generated a lot of passionate discussion and debate, even cheering and excitement in the room. So I guess this is a really great time as the parties are all turning their attention to their manifesto pledges and indeed the money that comes with that. The summit explored the political case for making education reform a priority. The discussions including the case for breaking down barriers to social mobility, which our chair, Kevin Ellis, spoke at, as well as the importance of preparing young people to build successful careers, the benefit of arts and co-curricular activities in education, and then finally, and certainly not least, the case for reform in science and technology in an age of new technologies. So I'd like to start by asking each of you, first of all, if you could give me one critical thing that students are not being taught in the current system and why that thing would be really important to pick up. So Priya, if I start with you.
Thank you. So one critical thing, I'm going to go with the word critical in your question. So I think it's more of an emphasis on critical thinking. It's really difficult. A lot of people ban that phrase around and that skill around, and you think, well, how do I teach that? What's really fascinating is that it can actually be weaved into various subjects and parts of the curriculum, but there could be more emphasis on it, and the emphasis is the key. When you have an exam system, an assessment system that prioritises certain skills, because to ace the exam, you have the strategy that you need to adopt, and that strategy is not adopting it's not an emphasis on critical thinking skills. That's a problem. And the reason I say that, just the context behind why I'm talking about critical thinking, is that in an age of generative AI, where everyone's seen the explosion of ChatGPT and large language model technology, we're going to be living very, very quickly in a world where, in the hands of bad actors, there's going to be a huge amount of spread and scale of disinformation, fake news, things that you don't know what to trust. And so the foundation of a democracy is a free press, right? But when you're receiving information and you're not actually sure where it's from, whether it's fake, whether it's true or not, you can see how actually this could quickly evolve into a situation where your democracy is threatened because people don't know what to read and what to trust. So critical thinking, I'm sounding really alarmist, but it's because I am. I'm terrified of this. I've got children and I just look at them and think, it's absolutely key that they're not duped in the future, that they're able to look at facts and be more discerning about what they read. But I wouldn't say that teachers in schools are not teaching this, because that's not true. Despite the system, many of them do, and they work really hard to. But the emphasis in the national curriculum for that particular skill needs to increase. And I think that will then help our students, in the future when they leave formal education.
Yeah, I agree. And as a mother of two teenage girls, I fully agree with that, all those statements, Priya. I guess I'm just referencing their teachers. Brett, if I come to you next, what were the things that you think students need to be taught in the future?
I mean, taking a step back, it is always difficult because there's always lots of conversations on what should schools teach, and people spend lots of time stuffing more and more stuff into the curriculum, and I think the first thing I'd say is it's always important to look a lot wider. That schools can do so much, teachers can do so much, but you have to look at other areas of society and parents and. I also chair National Citizen Service, things that youth organizations and others can do to be a part of it. I think in schools itself, I'm sure Oli will talk about oracy, which is something his school that he founded has done brilliantly. But I also really agree with the Times, Commission that currently there are it's very focused academic curriculum right now, and I look at 15-year-olds having to really choose 2 or 3 topics to go deep in, as opposed to a much broader curriculum, a much better understanding of the world around them, which I think is much more important. I think the idea that people would choose something at 15, which will be their career or their focus for the next 40 years, is just absurd. And, it's much better idea, as Priya said, to really understand, how to look at news correctly, how to look at the world correctly, how to understand things, than to focus on 2 or 3 topics for A level, which I think is the current way of operating.
Thanks, Brett. Oli?
Well, I think I sort of agree with both panelists in a way. I suppose what heads that I speak to, teachers say, is that for their children, they want a broad and balanced curriculum. In fact, that's what it says in the national curriculum. And I think I'm really inspired every day when I see teachers think about the needs of every child and building on the strength of those so they can fulfil their potential. So I think it's not. I suppose I don't think it necessarily needs a change. I think it needs us to all support that broad and balanced approach. I suppose in the particular question is, what skill? I would advocate for speaking, and my reason for that is because sometimes there's debates in education. Brett alluded to them. More in the curriculum, less in the curriculum. Teachers need to do more. But if we think about speaking, it is sort of how we learn, and I wouldn't want to leave that to chance. So it's the medium of instruction. It's the medium for teachers. It's how children can extrapolate what they understand from big ideas. And it's very hard to learn history without talking to one another, talking to your teacher in an effective way. So it's really good for academic learning, but it's also brilliant for the world of work, because what employers say to me in my role, they say, well, we want academic results. We have to be clear about that. They said that on the panel today, but they also want something more intangible that is kind of hard, I think, if you don't have, by dint of sitting around the dinner table in a family where you've got kind of high social capital. It's this idea of presenting yourself really well, articulating an argument. If you've got a minute, I guess, with your chair, Kevin Ellis of the PwC, if you've got 5 minutes with him, how are you going to persuade him of something? So I do think that's a really important skill. I think it goes alongside what Priya said, because once you can speak and articulate well, you are able to critically engage. It's 2 sides of the coin. So I guess I'm not pessimistic. I think lots of this stuff is happening, and I think we can work together to boost it.
Great, thank you. I guess I might move on, taking your point, Oli, around fulfilling potential. Brett spoke on the panel with Kevin Ellis today about the social mobility case for reform to really break down barriers to make education genuinely accessible for all. I think some of us have seen over the last sort of 20 years some improvement, but actually over the last five or so years, actually the attainment gap is really growing. So there's a real need to refocus on it, I think. And we talked a bit about on the panel, Brett, around the kind of issues appearing in the first years of a child's life, so gaps in literacy appearing quite early. What's your primary call to action from an early years perspective, Brett?
My primary call to action is that, we need to grow the supply of early years educators. I think that's the main thing. I think what is good news is over the last 2 or 3 years, both main political parties have started to prioritize getting parents, early years education. And I think they've come at it, especially the current government has come at it from the point of view of the workforce and getting parents back to work or getting moms back to work, which is, not how I would go. I would say, actually, that's great. But the most important thing is ensuring young children have access to a really great education, from a very young age, so that they're school ready and they don't fall behind, early in primary school. But at least it's on everyone's radar screen now, and it's really important. I'm a bit worried, there's currently a review of EYFS going on. I'm a bit worried about anything that weakens EYFS, because I think we have a good framework in ensuring that in early years, children actually have a proper framework they're going through. There's real positives with that. But the main thing the government needs to do going forward is actually get more supply of early years educators. And, that's either nurseries or childminders. The number of childminders has dropped in half in the last 5 years. I have a chart I sometimes show people just showing this decline of childminders over 15 years now. And if people want to know why their childcare is so expensive and why they can't find good childcare for their children, I point to that graph. They need to, turn around that decline in childminder numbers. They need to find ways for, nurseries to work where they're not paying their staff £8 an hour because it's absurd to ask any professional to work for that sort of salary. So, that needs to be the real focus, not just growing demand and telling parents you're going to get lots of more free childcare in the future, which is great, but actually figuring out who's going to provide this childcare and to make sure they're good and they're providing good childcare or good early years education.
Great, thanks, Brett. I think the other thing that came up actually from a number of the panels this morning around social mobility was actually thinking about work experience and I guess career support. I don't know whether, Oli, whether you wanted to also talk a bit about your reflections on the panels today.
Yeah, well, I think the careers education, I think, is different than it once was. I mean, people always tell a story about how they got the wrong advice at school, or should have been a librarian, or didn't get the advice, the work experience that made the tea, and all of that is. I understand that, but there is a different version of that I think that a lot of people are getting behind as a real consensus behind, which says, look, careers education is part of a broad and rich education. It's not an add-on, it's not an afterthought. And what does it mean? It involves employers getting involved very early on, particularly in primary school, where stereotypes about what you want to do are formed, unfortunately. Speak to my 6-year-old who wants to play for Spurs. I mean, we could do with him, but there is and often these stereotypes are gendered, so you need to sort of get in there early. It involves kind of boosting information about technical pathways, because we must have no wrong door for young people. So it's not university defaultism, it's the right path for young people. It's about sustained relationships with business. I know Priya on her panel spoke around that. So not just one-offs, it's meeting employers lots and lots of times, not just students, but teachers. And then it is about the curriculum, and it's not about changing the curriculum, it's about amplifying the skills that are in the curriculum and how they are used in the world of work. So maths, everyone talks about maths, but if you look at the skills in maths, ratio, data handling, proportion, those are all things that are used in a dazzling array of industries, often in the creative industries. I had a great colleague I met last night who said that, well, I'm going to teach maths through Shakespeare. And he said, okay, yeah, well, actually, you probably could do that. So I think it's about that sense of careers education is not a conversation with someone at the end of the school hall. It's broader and bigger than that. And we're trying to push that. And what gives me optimism is that schools understand that. Of course, they're under pressure, but they understand that's the way to do it. And what from our work is, again, really pleasing that schools that are serving the most disadvantaged students, schools with the highest proportion of FSM, are actually more engaged in gender than not. Now, it doesn't mean the outcomes are there. Obviously, there are differential outcomes, as Brett has said. But I think if we can unite behind what we want to do with careers education, and that's what we're seeking to do, and push in that direction, I think we can make a difference.
Great, thank you. I think what's been really interesting about this conversation so far is we haven't yet touched upon technology, but I think what came up again, I think 3 or 4 speakers talked about, I guess, the current explosion in technology being the biggest, I guess, transformation and change in our society since the kind of creation of the printing press. And Priya, if I might turn to you here, and when we talk a bit about, I guess, are we going fast enough, which you talked about a bit this morning, you talked about your wake-up moment in the kind of article you did in FE Week really recently about sort of 13 years ago, the value of really neuroscience and actually where you've taken that to think about tailoring education support. Do you think we've taken advantage enough yet of the opportunities that technology gives us? And I guess where might be the innovations you might want to highlight in terms of taking that forward?
So have we taken advantage? No. A really simple answer. No, and that's just because, where can we take advantage? Who takes advantage? It's really difficult running a school, right? And technology's not necessarily been the front of the agenda for years. When you've got recruitment crises, when you have a head teacher that's left, you've got another one, a stand-in, and then another one. They're dealing with these sort of real frontline issues every single day, and then we're saying, oh, look, here are these really great innovations that help you really fundamentally, but it's really, really difficult. Running a school is obviously not an easy job. I think that sometimes it just takes some of us to just sit down and actually think about it a little bit. And so have we managed to embed the technologies everywhere so that they can take advantage of it? No, there are always the pioneers and the innovators. So if you think very typically of the adoption curve, Rogers' adoption curve, you've got those sort of first early starters that always want to try everything new. And then based on the evidence, you have sort of the early majority, then the late majority. Then you have what I like to fondly call the kickers and the screamers, the laggards. I'm never going to use technology. I'm not going to touch it. And then COVID exploded, all of that. It just disrupted it because we were in the world's largest edtech experiment for nearly a couple of years. And what's really interesting now is that we've seen that different technologies, whether it's artificial intelligence technology, ours sort of went from 13 countries to 56 countries just in the last sort of 18 months, which is incredible. And that's been because wherever you sit on that typical adoption curve, people have experimented with it and said, oh, actually, yeah, it benefits and I can use it. But then, as I said on the panel earlier, sort of physically when we were sitting in the Times summit, funding is a real problem in this country. It's not easy to be able to afford even the cheapest of tools, because when you're sitting there and looking at your 20 teachers and thinking which two actually am I not going to renew, or where can I not afford a teaching assistant, you're trying to save every single penny, and you still want to take the kids on the school trips, right? You still want to mow the lawn of the garden. It's unbelievable, by the way, how much lawn mowing of some gardens of schools actually costs. And then there's all these things that they have to deal with. So no, we haven't taken advantage of all these technologies yet. But what has happened since November and since the launch of ChatGPT, and which captured the attention of the masses, the people who never wanted to have a conversation about AI, they didn't really know what it was, is that suddenly people are looking at it and thinking, right, we need to think about the relevance of this for education. Now, this is where the media plays a really important part, because you can have a really polarized discussion of, oh, it's going to transform education, or, oh my God, it's going to destroy it. And actually, there needs to be a really balanced conversation going back and forth on where are the opportunities and the benefits, where should we seize this with both hands and make sure that it can actually help level the playing field. We can actually put this towards our leveling up agenda. We could use it in the classroom. We can reduce teacher workload. We can maybe help on the skills front, all of that. And then also, how does this transform the system of education, a system of education that hasn't really changed for very long. But one thing I do want to say, because I was too afraid to jump in on an audio sort of a podcast here, but Brett's point on early years, when you don't solve gaps in the early years, the gaps only widen, right? So where is their early years? Where is their technology to help, even if it's not kids in early years, but the teachers and the deliverers of education? One of the key problems that practitioners on the front line who are experts in what they do, we should listen to them more often, is they say at 5 years old, when kids come to primary school, the problem is that many of them are not ready to learn. If you have a society where kids who are getting the childcare, right, the parents can afford it, they're sending them to those sort of private nurseries and it's expensive, those kids are turning up at 5 ready to learn. But then you get a bunch of kids, a whole portion of society that come in and they don't actually know how to sit in a circle. They don't know how to be quiet yet. They don't know how to pay attention. You are going to have a huge problem in terms of how that affects the range of abilities going forward. And there are gaps already. So while technology hasn't yet been grasped by everyone, I think that it's pretty undeniable that it will be really disruptive, that it will, the acceleration of adoption and embedding of technology in education will be a lot faster now because of generative AI and what it's done than ever before. But I think we also need to go back to first principles, the things that Brett, for example, was talking about. And okay, there's technology innovation, but there are some real fundamentals of education that we need to focus on as well. And we need to do all of these things in parallel. It's a big job. And by all means, I've not got all the answers. But again, it's this back and forth discussion rather than this really polarized, yes, it works, no, it doesn't kind of binary situation that I often find the debate lands itself in, where we don't end up having an intelligent debate about anything.
Yeah, and it sounds like, as you say, there's opportunities and challenges there, aren't there? So it's not just all negativity. There's a lot of positive things that can be taken forward.
I don't know if I jump in, but just to Priya's point, the reason I started Tiney was I visited primary schools across the country in low-income communities. I've probably been to over 100, and you could just see the difference between the kids who have had a good early years experience and those who haven't. And usually in the lowest income areas, I'd speak to teachers who would just be tearing their hair out, when they know they have kids who have come in there. People often ask, what is early years education? It's not, early years education isn't getting kids sitting at a table doing calculus. It's getting them ready to learn, getting them ready to work with others, getting them, socialized, getting them like in that learning mindset so they can go to school and they can actually, learn in a really positive way. And you could see the difference between children who hadn't had that experience. And then they come to school and they've never played before. I mean, I've heard so many stories and saw so many examples of children who are starting reception year one, never having played before, not knowing how to play, which is, of course, the way so many children learn. It's how they learn. And actually the teacher having to teach them how to play and how to do basic things like that. And if they're spending a year or two in school just learning those basic things, if they have an outstanding teacher, then they're still going to be behind. But many of them won't have that outstanding teacher in primary school, and so they're going to be even further behind. And it just keeps on reinforcing itself.
Yeah, and sorry, can I just say, so we've done early years, and then we've got to look at the entire spectrum of education. So FE, further education, is the forgotten sector. Like, no one ever talks about it on any panel. No one ever brings that up, right? Where's the investment in the colleges sector for the students who left school at 16 and then decided to go and do an apprenticeship or a vocational training course? 220,000 students resit maths and then English as well every single year in this country, and you need to resit it to get your level 4 sort of old equivalent of a C grade in order to actually get your hairdressing qualification or your agricultural qualification or your nursing qualification. And so there's also a question of leveraging technology. Now, I'm proud to say that we serve over 70% of colleges in the UK with AI technology for maths and English. But that sector, it was fascinating. We had to dislodge the incumbent that had really legacy old technology in the sector that wasn't serving it adequately. But then what was interesting is we did an impact study. We did an impact study with a grant that was given by an independent fund maker. It wasn't the EEF that everyone relies on. It was just the UFI Trust. That grant and that impact study led us from going from 6 colleges to 70% of the country. So how can we mimic those sorts of situations in every single part of the education system, all the way to higher ed, to professional ed, because we need a lifelong learning attitude as technology just constantly transforms, it constantly changes. And therefore, what that actually means is that policymakers who go through a 4-year cycle of government, they need to have a short-term, a medium-term, and a long-term strategy. Because your short-term strategy is usually for your upskilling and reskilling. Oh, how many techies do we need to build AI technology to be, in a post-Brexit environment, the most competitive AI economy outside of the US and China? Your medium-term strategy, right, is for those secondary school kids that have not left school yet, but they're going to leave and things will have transformed. And your long-term is for the primary kids in the early years. You need all the strategies put together. And yes, you're not going to be able to reap the rewards and have the headlines from those strategies in the next 4 years, but you will have a lasting legacy and you'll have transformed the country and really invested in this area, which surely is why every one of us is doing what we're doing for a living.
Couldn't agree more. I guess I wanted to bring Oli in here, actually, also on the FE side, because I know it's an area you're...
I said, Priya, I did mention FE and apprenticeships a lot on the panel.
You mentioned FE, Oli, but I knew you would. The Careers and Enterprise company I'm a long fan of, and I think you know that. Yeah.
Thank you, Priya. I suppose I want to take a step back because I think I've been the head teacher that Priya described. I've done that job, and it is hard. I mean, it's sort of I sort of think they're heroic, and college principals are heroic. So I want to take a step back and think about the process of change in education, because I think change in education is actually quite complex, because a lot of things in a school, let's say, are actually some older ideas, like good behaviour. You need good behaviour for good learning. I sort of think we need to so there's some things do need to sort of stay the same or evolve in different ways. So, and what I think, Priya, what you said that really spoke to me was we need a really intelligent conversation, because if you just say to people, well, we're going to massively change because everything's changing, I think you're more likely for the profession to recoil and say, well, okay, I'm going to stick with what I know. So I think we've got to have a really, really intelligent debate. And I think it's got to be, if this is not too hard, a kind of both and in lots of ways. So we're both going to secure some traditional stuff that we absolutely need, and we're going to do it in new and interesting ways using tech and other things. So I think that's the conversation that I think the sector needs to have. And in a way, I don't think that's about government always. That's about leaders here going, okay, let's take control of the agenda in the interest of all young people, and let's take people together with, on a journey of change together. And so the thing that we can all agree on, though, is that the last The next 10 years in education are going to be different from the previous 10 years, which were different from the previous 10 years. So change is a constant in education. I think where we sometimes get into trouble is where we think we change something overnight, we think it's going to happen. So I suppose my reflection of today is brilliant ideas, but we've also got to think about the process of change so that it lands well for teachers and the young people they serve.
I love that, and that's amazing. Even the Times Education Commission final report, right? That is a meeting of minds. They did all the research. They spoke to people on the front line. They spoke to policymakers. They spoke to all sorts of practitioners, people in the industry, and that sort of thought leadership is coming from different directions. The only problem, and the reason why policymakers need to be absolutely involved and they need to be bold, is because we treasure what we measure, right? And if the assessment system, assessment is for learning, it's part of learning, but actually people think learning is for assessment, it's for the exam, right? And there are lots of parents, and as much of the people listening on this LinkedIn channel want to say that's not me, how many of you, worked yourselves backwards from Oxbridge when your child was a fetus, right? And said, how do I get my kid into, Russell Group universities or whatever? And which nursery should I send them to? Then which primary, prep school, secondary? Loads of them do it, right? And it's ridiculous that lots of people say they don't, because that's why we have the system that we often have. And so what we need to do, and the only way in which you make fundamental change, because you're a head teacher, right? If you're sitting there as a head teacher, you're accountable, you've got Ofsted coming in, but parents are your customers, they're your stakeholders, and they're saying, hey, I want my kid to get the grades that they need so they can go on to the next thing. And you treasure what you measure. The assessment system is driving learning and teaching and learning. It's driving everything we do in that education system. As much as I know schools do so much more than what than what's in the curriculum, I'm well aware of it. But, a third of primary schools don't teach science. Why not? Because it's not in the SATs, right? So they focus on what's in the SATs, right? Because they know that they've got to get kids over that line. How many secondary schools have de-emphasised PE, drama, sport? Fascinating. The top skills from the World Economic Forum report are leadership, right? Critical thinking, creativity, being able to work in a team. How many of those skills are fundamental when you're in a play and drama, when you're singing in a choir, when you're playing an instrument in the orchestra, when you're in a team playing hockey, right? All of those skills, interestingly, those soft skills, what I like to call core skills, are fundamental in those subjects that have actually been de-emphasised because of the English baccalaureate, the EBAC, right? And so, the thing is that we need the involvement of policymakers who are going to be bold and brave in the next election, because if they do not change the assessment system, it doesn't matter how much we try to change and shape things and innovate. What happens is the schools with the resources and the money will do it, and that's wonderful for them, and they should. But then the other schools that don't have the resources, that are struggling with recruitment and retention of teachers, who are having to essentially just get kids over the line, that's where you start to see a divide, a digital divide, a general divide, and a problem with, and that's where the levelling up agenda comes.
And you can see, I'm going to have to come to a close, and you can see why we were late for this conversation, because there was so much passionate debate in the room, and I think we'll continue offline. And you can see that the Times Commission has really kicked off a discussion and debate. And actually, I'm really, as you say, Priya, I'm really excited to see what's in the manifestos. I really hope the passion in the room and the evidence provided is going to lead to both changes and indeed funding. So thank you so much all for you joining. I know you're all very passionate. We could have gone on for another half hour. And thank you for listening. There'll be, if you have missed any of it, a recording will be available on PwC UK's YouTube. Thank you again, and goodbye.